Here are the facts, the real pravda. Ukraine is winning the war. Russia is losing the war. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are both lying sacks of shit. Hi, I'm David Dubato, and you have just entered the no delusion zone. My very special guest today is someone who's been on several times before. I'm very happy to have her back on now. Anna Danilchuk, better known, I believe, as Anna from Ukraine. And that's the handle of her very popular YouTube channel, Anna from Ukraine. I highly encourage those of you who have not yet watched her channel to do so and then to subscribe. It will really, really help. So without saying anything else, because she doesn't need anything else said, Anna, welcome back to the No Delusion Zone.
Thank you so much. Always happy to speak with you and to share more truths from Ukraine.
So, all right, I agree with you. I agree with you. As we were just saying off air, there is so much misinformation, lies that are being forced, especially on the American public, that it's really, really difficult to try to get the real information, the real news, the facts of what are going on in Ukraine right now. It's like shouting into the wind. So I'm always happy to have you on because you give the perspective of the Ukrainians, the average Ukrainians. You're obviously not a politician. You're not an elected official. You're not in the military. You're not in the intelligence service. You're a Ukrainian. You're a Ukrainian woman who has had to live through this hell for the last several years. So your opinion is extremely important. Let me start by saying or asking you this, Anna. Talking about misinformation and lies, specifically from the Kremlin and unfortunately today from the White House. Talk to us about what's going on in Russia with the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically in Belgorad, which was the focus of your latest podcast. What's going on in the ground there, and what are the successes of the Ukrainian armed forces?
Thank you so much for this question. I do often name myself professional Ukrainian because I am a civilian and I try to share the perspective of an ordinary Ukrainian, how we feel about the news, both from inside Ukraine and global news that are connected with Ukraine. And you know what makes me sad is that right now all the global media are very concentrated, very focused on the circulation of nonsense between the White House and the Kremlin. And mainly, people think that the future of this war, the future peace in Europe and the world, is closely connected with the negotiation process, with the comments of Rubio or Witkoff, when in reality, the Ukrainian armed forces are writing the history and doing the job. And the most important things, they are happening on the front lines. Because what we observe right now is this open humiliation of Donald Trump by Putin, who did not agree on Trump's plan of this ceasefire on the ground and keeps bombing and shelling Ukraine even more because that's a terror plan. He wants to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people so that maybe we agree on some very bad conditions just to stop the suffering. But Ukrainians witnessing what Russians do on the occupied territories will never give up. And maybe you've noticed recently there were polls where like close to 90% of Ukrainians are not prepared to follow the demands of Russia. So we may say that all of the country is not ready to follow the demands of Russia. And that is why our main focus on the problems and victories on the front lines. And I feel, from one point of view, very grateful that I can share it with my audience, through my channel. But for many people, it comes as a surprise, like some of our victories. For example, 2 days ago, Ukrainian army liberated a settlement in Luhansk region. What many forget about or not talk about, that during these years, with all the efforts of the Russian army, with the support of China, Iran, and North Korea, they don't manage to take what they want. They did not manage to capture any new regional centers after 2014. They had Kherson for a very short period, but it was liberated. And if we compare a number of the Russian losses to the number of the Russian territorial gains, it's disastrous. It's nothing. It's just like a huge destruction of the Russian population, and that's it. Ukrainians have to fight because we fight for our home, for our schools, for our hospitals, for our streets, for our memories, for our territories. Why are Russians doing that? That's a question no one can answer. And right now, you know that one of the plans of Vladimir Putin was to create a buffering zone between Ukraine and Russia. And he, of course, saw it on the territory of Ukraine. But I think we see it differently, and we are working on that in a different direction. And there are reports that some of the Ukrainian troops are now inside the Russian region of Belgorod, the second Russian region, because there are still a lot of territories that we control in Kursk, despite all the efforts. And oh my God, dozens of thousands of North Korean soldiers. And here I want to stress, I believe the world had a totally wrong reaction to that, because we literally have another nuclear country fighting against Ukraine. And they brought their boots on the ground, and no one is ready to do that for Ukraine and speak about that as an escalation of something unbelievable, when in reality, this is already happening, but from the other side. So, Kursk and Belgorod, there are Ukrainian troops in two of these regions. That is a very clear demonstration how vulnerable Russia is, that Russia does not control its own borders, that as a classical bully is totally unprepared to defend itself. It can only be violent and, aggressive outside, but when they need to protect their strategic objects like oil refineries or military air bases or ammunition depots, there is nothing they can do. I'm sure you heard about this very serious destruction of their arsenals and aircraft on Anhel's military airfield inside Russia. It is not the first time that Ukrainian drones destroy the supplies there. Don't you think Russians want to protect it? Of course. Don't they know it's a strategic object for them? They do, but there is nothing they can do. They fail. And once again, there are reports about some settlements inside Belgorod region that are controlled by Ukrainian soldiers. I hope we will get proof of that, but even the Institute for the Study of War wrote about that. So these are not just like rumors inside Ukraine. And if you have a look at the events, this military events that take place there during the last couple of days, it seems very realistic because we have destroyed a big command point there. And according to some reports, with Russian commanders in it. And also, just on the 21st of March, it seems to me, four Russian helicopters, two Mi-8, and two Ka-52, were destroyed also in Belgorod region. So perhaps something big is happening if we look just like at how many things get destroyed during this day. So hopefully there will be more updates about the process of Belgorod region demilitarization and the creation of this buffering zone.
It's funny to me. It's not a humorous topic, but when the Russian propaganda machine, the Kremlin, keeps saying how all Ukrainian drones have been shot down over these targets, and it's only the debris from these drones that falls down and creates some minor fires, which are then immediately put out by their fire department. I never knew that such small pieces of debris could destroy such large installations as are happening in Russia. It's amazing. Maybe this is a new form of weapon. You should just shoot little particles, little pieces of your drones at the installations. They seem to do a lot of damage.
You see how good Ukrainian drones, if just that debris can do the job.
Yeah.
I've heard jokes among the producers of drones that perhaps we should name some models debris, like we have different names for missiles, we have different, so maybe we should name drones debris so that Russians won't be lying when they say like
Yes, I think
some
that's an excellent
debris.
idea. That would be a great
Yeah.
meme. It would be a great slogan. It would be a great corporate name for some new drones. They'd probably make a lot of money. Talking about that topic, and, you mentioned, of course, in your podcast and just now, that Ukrainian forces most likely are in control of at least a small area within the Belgorad Oblast or region. They are certainly still in fairly substantial areas within the Kursk Oblast. And as you just said, Ukraine has destroyed military installations. I think it's as far as 1,800 kilometers or more inside of Russia. And yet, the Russian people, of course, are not rising up. They don't, there's not even any demonstrations. They seem to be fine with the so-called Nazi regime occupying large areas of their countries and destroying military installations at will. Boy, these are some of the most understanding and calm people in the world that would allow such actions against the motherland. I'm very impressed. What do you think?
I think that Russians follow their ideology, which is very different from the Ukrainian one. And you can often hear them saying they are small people. This is both their excuse and I don't know, their explanation and their escape. If you watch some interviews of the Russian population when asked about the need to change the political leader or are you satisfied or dissatisfied with something, they very often say, well, what can we do? We are small people, we are small people. And people, I mean, like viewers, they underestimate this message. And it clearly demonstrates that after the centuries of terror and zombification, Russians don't see themselves as agents of change, as active citizens, as people that can do anything. And that is another reason why we cannot expect them to act, to go out on protests or to change the regime. It's not a part of their character, a part of their DNA. It's a tragedy, actually. But it is also this gap between Ukraine and Russia, civilizational gap between our nations. And one of the reasons why Putin got into this trap, I know he believed this will be a blitzkrieg. He did not plan he will continue fighting for some really small, let's be honest, really small pieces of land for 3 years, losing almost 1 million of his soldiers. He thought he will march to Kyiv greeted with flowers. Why? Not only because people were lying to him or flattering him, as now Americans do to Donald Trump, but uh, he genuinely believed that we are Russians, we are like Russians, because I think if something similar were happening to Russia, I mean, like, I don't know, other tanks were driving in the direction of Moscow, people would not go into the territorial defense as it is in Ukraine. They actually, at the start of the war, tried to make something like territorial defense in Russia, and it totally failed. And if you remember this very brief but bright coup of or march of Prigozhin, did you see like anyone reacting in Russia in that regions, either supporting Prigozhin or trying to stop him? I mean, apart from like special services or some troops or army, I mean, people. No. So this is a very big mistake when people are afraid of the Russian population, its reaction. What can they do? They cannot do anything. They don't know how to do it. They've lost these receptors or whatever. And if, for example, Ukrainians were as crazy and as violent as Russians are, they would simply accept that. this is one of the, like some of the Ukrainian prisoners of war, some people who had close contact with the Russian military. And when they speak, one of the questions that Russians often ask is, why can't you accept? Why can't you just like say, okay, like what Trump says, like stop the dying, but become Russia. Why can't, what's the problem? Some of them they genuinely think like, okay, I'm Russian, for me it's okay. Why it's not okay for you? What's wrong? And they cannot see this. They lost these receptors of freedom, of self-respect, of dignity. And that is why when I receive comments like something is brewing in Russia, soon they will go out on the no, no, they won't. Uh, After the collapse of the USSR, you saw like Ukraine shaping, the Baltic shaping, Poland shaping. We all came from this very bad background, from poverty, misery, suppression, zombification. But somehow we started building our democracies, and Russians know, and that's why they want to drag us into the past.
For all of my life, most of my life, let me put it this way, um, I was taught, and also from many, many conversations I had with Russians, that
Mhm.
you, meaning Ukraine, is little Russia. Literally, in Russian, it means little Russia, as you know. That's how they thought of it, and that you were just Russians. In fact, I was told that Ukraine is just a poorer form of Russia. They're Russians, but they're just poor and not as educated. And that is what the majority of Russians not only believed then, that's what they believe now. Because as you said, Anna, this is about 8 centuries worth of brainwashing in Russians. They have never had a democracy, nothing even close to a democracy. And Ukraine has. And Ukraine has always, I'm not telling you anything new. I'm saying this for my viewers, really. Ukraine has always had a separate culture, a separate language, a separate literature, you name it, a separate nationality. And people that don't study or don't know anything about Ukraine or Russia find that hard to believe. So, on my side, in the West, especially the United States, we had and maybe still do a Russian centric view of the world, which is why it is so hard for Americans, even today, especially today with the Trump administration, to understand why you stubborn Ukrainians won't just accept your fate and become Russians and start using the ruble again. So if you could, let me just, I know maybe I'm not meaning to insult you. If you could, for my viewers, could you name the main differences between the Ukrainian culture and Russians? What's the difference? Why aren't you just accepting that you're a Russian? Please explain this in one word or less. I'm kidding.
It's a hard question. It's like explain why Spanish and German are different nations.
Because it's that
Like,
difference,
because
right?
they are different.
I know, but again,
Um,
we don't understand. When I say we, the vast majority of Americans don't get it. And I'm sorry, President Trump is reinforcing that confusion.
well, yeah, I have to say that lots of Americans think that Europe is a country.
And
And
Africa,
Europe
I
is
know, I know,
very,
I know.
very different,
Yes, I
like
know,
Germany, Spain,
I know.
Scandinavian countries. Apart from history, like we have different histories, we have different languages, we have different, partially different branches of Christianity. We have very different attitudes towards what is a Ukrainian dream and what is a Russian dream, American dream. And in Ukraine,
What's the
people
difference
were
between a Ukrainian dream and a Russian dream? That's an excellent point.
yeah, so I'd say that Ukrainians are way closer to the Americans because Ukrainians value private property, and
Hmm.
that was the reason for Holodomor genocide. Why? Because in Ukraine, people are hardworking and people love the land. We have very fertile soils, there are lots of farmers. And back in the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th centuries, we had very strong quickly evolving middle class. So people that had their farms, people that had their, I don't know, meat production, milk production, like first factories were shaping and people were becoming rich. And then we were occupied by Bolsheviks, by communists who wanted to get that, to nationalize that. And the main reason for Holodomor genocide was that Ukrainians, well-off middle-class Ukrainians, did not want to join collective farms, were fighting for the independence, wanted to return to this normal state organization when you can own something, not just your country has, like, state has everything and you have nothing. Plus, I think for the Western audience, it's quite obvious that you can take good care only of the things that belong to you or at least someone.
Tell my
If it
audience what
is
the Holodomor was. Explain.
uh,
Again, most of my audience doesn't know
there
the
were a few
genocide.
waves, but the greatest one was 1932, 1933. That was an artificial famine that caused by Stalin's regime and their desire to destroy this middle-class Ukrainians that were well off and that did not want to join collective farms. They did not want to give their horses, their cows, their fields, everything. And they realized that this middle class is actually very strong. And if united, taking into account Ukrainian Cossack history, can actually fight back. And we have to remember that in 1917, 1922, we had the period of Ukraine's renowned independence. So it was just 10 years ago in the 30s. So it was quite realistic that this class could fight back and, for example, exit the Soviet Union and proclaim the independent Ukraine. They had the knowledge, they had the resources, and they had the will. So Stalin, together with his people and the supporters of communism, began Holodomor, this genocide, when they not just collected, they put first unrealistic numbers of the grains that they want to collect from the people. And like, for example, you know that you can have a ton, and they will tell you that you have to give 5 tons. And if you were not able to provide that, you were punished. You were not allowed to leave your village, and everything was taken out of your village. So they were taking out not just bread, not just vegetables, but literally everything that they could find. People were hiding food, people were digging food below the floor or something like that. But if they found, they could execute people because they described it as a crime against the state. You don't want to share, you don't want to put the standards and so on. But what another thing that proves it's a pure genocide, they did not let these people escape these territories. So you could not travel to the city to get some food. And they did not let these people on the trains because they could, their starved view could frighten and like definitely go against this image of the Soviet Union. It was hidden and like the least awful statistic says that we lost 4 million. But some estimate that we've lost 9 million of Ukrainians. Also, the trauma is big because approximately like 500,000 children were not born, so which makes this loss like greater. And there are records of that. It's official. And a lot of them are in the Moscow archives, and they still do not allow using them, which is a demonstration of Moscow's attitude, even before the war, even before the annexation of Crimea. And the territories that suffered the most from Holodomor genocide are the ones that were later severely Russified because these empty, dead villages were re-inhabited by Russians and Belarusians who were brought there. And that is one of the reasons why Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv regions speak Russian. And that is an answer how these Russian people appeared there because if we look back in history, like 100 years ago, Belgorod region, Kursk region, they were speaking Ukraine. They were ethnically Ukrainian, Kuban. There were lots of territories that were Ukrainians, so just the country. So they first destroyed the population and then they brought Russians to that territories. And a great number of Ukrainians decided to identify themselves as Russians too back in the 40s, in the 50s. Why? Because they had this very typical association that if you are Ukrainian, you can be killed. Like it's very typical for the victims of genocide to change their identity, national identity, if they think that they can be prosecuted for their national identity. So you think that, for example, if you put your children as Russians in passports and you teach them speak Russian, you know they will survive. And if you keep educating them as Ukrainians and you insist they are Ukrainians, they can not live until they, I don't know, finish school or something. So this is how they were Russifying Ukrainian territories. It's not about the spread of culture or something, but one of the main aims of that was to prevent this like a new state shaping in Ukraine, but also these people were protecting private property. And Ukraine lives because of the middle class. We do have middle class, and that what makes Russians so angry. You remember how they were stealing Ukrainian sneakers and t-shirts and so on when they were looting Ukrainian flats. And in one of the houses, they wrote, "Oh, because you cannot live that well."
Don't forget the
Like they
toilets.
all, yeah, but they could write on the walls,
Yeah.
you should not live that well, or and these are people that don't live super well. These are just middle class people who have a flat, who have good sneakers, a bike for their children, and they can go on vacation, let's say to Turkey once a year. And for Russians, that's something unrealistic, especially for those that join the army. These are miserable people, and instead of changing their country, they come and like classical ord, they steal it and so on. So in Ukraine, this dream was to build your house, to have your garden, to have a car, to travel and see something. And middle class is also active as citizens. This is what make our democracy stronger. Middle class uh, votes, middle class thinks before they vote. And in Russia, they don't want to have this middle class. They want to have oligarchs and poor and educated people, because for poor and educated people don't ask questions. They simply want to eat. And in Ukraine, we have developed that class, that group, like it is most of the Ukraine, people who are not rich, but people who are not poor. And people who ask questions, who have realistic dreams, who are educated, who work, who have like, and I think that's the difference. So, um,
No,
and
that's
Russians,
that's
they
great.
typically want to take away something. Their thing is to take away. And I remember one of my friend's subscribers once left a comment that in Russia you cannot become rich by creating, because at a certain moment they will take away everything that you create. Yeah, it may not be like they take away as invaders from Ukraine, but they also take away from this more or less normal people in Russia when an oligarch or a small regional oligarch or like mafia of your oblast will notice that you have a successful business and they will try to take it away. So people in Russia don't even try to become wealthy in this like normal understanding. I don't mean millionaires or billionaires, but you know, when you are well off, you have enough and maybe a little bit more, but you don't want to be like super businessman. And the Ukrainian dream is just like to live normal life, and in Russia, it is impossible.
I really, really appreciate you going through all of that because, again, I know that the vast majority of people in my country do not understand the difference between the Ukrainian culture and the Russian culture. And I just very briefly talk, you'd mentioned, of course, the just horrible, the Holodomor. When I was, and I may have told you this before, but when I was visiting Moldova many years ago, before even the first invasion of Ukraine, I went to the Moldovan National History Museum, which had an exhibit about the Ukrainian Holodomor, and there was many, many letters there posted from Ukrainian mothers to Stalin back in the 30s. And I was traveling with some Russians, and they translated these letters, some of these letters to me, that these mothers had written to Stalin, pleading for him to stop the famine, to allow food into their villages, to allow their children to live. And they were just gut-wrenching letters. And I'm telling you this because, and again, I apologize if I told you this before, the Russians that were with me, not all of them, but many of them laughed at the Russian or the Ukrainian mothers' letters saying such things as how stupid of them, how silly that they would waste the time of the great Stalin. He doesn't have time for their ridiculous pleas, for their letters. They should just accept their fate. How embarrassing. I can't tell you my emotions. I not on even I can't say those words on the podcast, what I said to them and how I felt. But you want to talk about the difference between the Russian culture and the Ukrainian culture? To me, that summarized it. And I didn't need anyone else to tell me anything else after that. And it's since been confirmed many, 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 many times. But again, I appreciate you going through that little history course for the Americans, at least in my viewership, my audience, about the big differences. Let me ask you this, because I know you have to go pretty soon, and I don't want to keep you over. To just change the subject just a little bit before we go. What are you hearing? What are you feeling? The people on the street, again, not the politicians or the military, about the probable loss of American support and the probable support of the Europeans stepping up much more. What's the feeling in Ukraine as to whether Europe can actually step up and supply Ukraine with what it needs to defend itself against Russia until the supplies from Europe and Ukrainian factories start to equal or come close to what America has been supplying?
First of all, I want to thank the people of America for their support of Ukraine because I think way more Americans support Ukraine than those who don't.
I agree.
And I believe it will return back to normal somehow because, Ukraine and Europe is way closer to the American mindset and system of values than Russia. Numerous American presidents wanted to reset relations with Russia and always failed and failed tremendously. And this will be just the same failure. And it's impossible to separate Russia from China. No way, and so on. But I think that, first of all, it's very impolite how Donald Trump speaks not just about Ukraine, but about the support of the European countries too, because it was not that small. And actually, if you take into account a number of the things that they provided, I mean, the number of aircraft, the number of tanks, it's a lot. Another trick that many people don't talk about is the sums of money and the way you count them. In the United States, you not just count the price of a tank that you are giving to Ukraine, but you also count the price of the tank that you are buying for the United States to substitute the one that you give to Ukraine. So technically, you give Ukraine one older tank, but it looks as if you have given Ukraine one old and one new. But that new remains in the United States. Europe does not count like that. European countries count only the exact expenses. So if they have given you an old tank, they count it as an old tank and they don't count the one they bought for themselves as support for Ukraine. I think that from the very beginning, it was really bad that the focus was on money. I'd prefer if we count in equipment because we need equipment. We need missiles, we need Patriots, HIMARS systems, F-16s, and so on. And it would give a totally different vibe and feeling because people are very like when they think about money, it's very difficult for them to accept giving money even for a good course. And like everyone thinks, oh, we could have that $50 million inside and so on. But if you tell them that you have given F-16 and like you have F-35 and you have given just one F-16, that's its price, people accept that way easier. And what Ukraine needs, weapons, ammo. So from the very start, it's very wrong that people just are counting the money as if these are, I don't know, boxes of cash that travel to Ukraine. No, these are the prices of the equipment that we need. I think that Donald Trump demonstrated a tremendous level of ignorance, aggression towards his allies. And that is one of the reasons why Europe and Canada is getting more active. And they are worried not just for Ukraine and Russia, and like that war can continue to other territories if Ukraine fails, but I think they are afraid of how the White House will act. Recently when Trump was saying that, like, we will sell to our allies this bad equipment, like bad aircraft or something, because maybe they will not be our allies. I think he's destroying this military business of the United States tremendously quickly because people listen to what the president says. And I think more and more of the European countries will stop buying American stuff because if your president says that we are selling you BS, why should we buy it? And I think that nobody believes here in Ukraine, okay, nobody believes in Ukraine that anything can come out of these negotiations because literally there is nothing we can talk about. There is no context for that. It's just Donald Trump who keeps saying that he's a perfect deal maker. There is no background for that. Ukraine is prepared to fight. There is no way we will surrender. We did not surrender in 2025, 22. We have a lot of experience. We have way more weapons. We have way more support. So why would we accept that capitulation that we did not accept back in 2022 when everything was way worse? So no, Russia wants to continue. They see weakness of Trump. They see how easy to trick him, and Russia will continue also fighting. They talk about ceasefire. There is no ceasefire from the Russian side. They keep bombing Kyiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy. You've seen that on the news. So people may keep pretending that like I'm the greatest peacemaker, but like the reality is very different and you cannot hide it, the reality to that extent. And I think that all of these talks, all of these glorifying comments that may come from Ukrainian government or something, we are just buying ourselves more time so that our European allies can be better prepared, can change their constitution, for example, as they did in Germany, so that they can enlarge the military fund. Unfortunately, it's all very slow, and Elon Musk would say that's bureaucracy, but I personally prefer bureaucracy and democracy than the dictatorship. When you break the laws that quickly, when you destroy the institutions that were successful and the reasons for many countries' liberation. So I think what everyone is doing right now in Ukraine and Europe is just like trying to get more, I don't know, like intelligence, to spend more time, like getting ourselves a little bit more time to be prepared. But everyone knows that I'm not saying America because I'm not equating America to Donald Trump, but I think that Trump and his friends will try either to leave NATO or play against the NATO while being still inside of NATO. And people in the European Union, in Canada, in Australia, they see that, they understand that. It's not that mm, like one of the Ukrainian news that I read recently, they say that like Donald Trump was preparing that ambush, and he also confirmed that he wanted that humiliation of Zelensky in the Oval Office. And Zelensky also knew that Trump is a very weird person to talk to. And his advisors were telling him, keep flattering him, keep flattering him. And Zelensky said, like, but that's not normal. But that is not normal to keep like worshiping or flattering someone like he's a toddler, you know? And I don't know, Trump's fanatics, they don't see it. But the whole world sees that. Like, you have to flatter and worship a totally inadequate man. And if people are worshiping him, like, I mean, they are doing it not because they do, but because just like they know, okay, we can get like two more weeks of, I don't know, Starlink. So let's say, you are the greatest leader.
Oh, I agree.
So
I
just
agree.
like,
Look, it's the old story of the emperor has no clothes. They're afraid
yeah.
to tell Trump that he's absolutely naked before the world. He looks foolish because they're afraid of him. Look, let me say
Yeah.
this in closing because I know you have to go, but and I've said this before, Anna. I've made podcasts about this. I've written articles. Donald Trump is not going to support Ukraine. I mean, you know that. It's obvious. But I mean, I think he's going to not only not support Ukraine, I feel, unfortunately, he's going to aid Russia against Ukraine if push comes to shove. I'm not saying he's going to actively give them weapons or send American troops to fight on the side of Russia, although that's not out of the realm of possibility with this madman either. But he's not going to support Ukraine. He probably is either going to pull out of NATO formally, or if not, he's just going to stop participating, which amounts to the same thing. I just posted a piece in a podcast about how I believe he definitely will not honor Article 5 if if a NATO country is attacked. Specifically, I mentioned Estonia because that's one of the more likely areas along the Narva River. He's just not going to be there. He's not going to support Europe. So, however, and I want to say the flip side of this, the positive side, I firmly believe Ukraine is more than capable of holding their own right now and for the next several months at least against Russia until Europe gets its act together, in which they're doing very fast for them, and they do start supplying the weapons and ammunition that Ukraine needs. They're going through a seismic shift right now, meaning just an incredible fast change in attitude. Fear for your life does that sometimes. And that's what's going on in Europe right now. And I do believe that very soon, within the year, that they are going to supply enough weapons, ammunition, and surveillance capability to Ukraine to keep taking it to the Russians and eventually win this damn war.
I agree with you. And one more thing, Trump is very ignorant and very, like, he ruins a lot of things. I'd say the majority of things. And we don't want an ally like that. So the very fact that he will support Russia, for example, does not mean that this will really help Russia. He can accidentally, for example, destroy the world economy. He seems to be very active in that dimension when he brings a crisis with his tariffs and so on. And this will then ruin Russian economy because Russian economy is in a very bad state. And if something really bad happens to the global economy, Russia's dead. So there are a lot of ways how Trump, wanting to save and help Russia, can actually destroy Russia against his intention, just as he bankrupted his six companies, like, or six times. He did not want that. He thought he was successful. So the same may happen with his friendship and support for Russia. It can actually destroy. And his stance on Ukraine can actually help us, not the country. You don't want a friend like Trump. I don't. Nobody in Ukraine wants. We are sometimes genuinely worried for the people of the United States. If he decides, for example, to support Russia with, I don't know, troops or something like that, I hope that Americans will react to that. There are a number of things that would definitely trigger protests here in Ukraine. Uh, Fortunately or unfortunately, you had hundreds of years of democracy and freedom. And maybe you have started believing that freedom is for free, but it's not. And we will see how it goes. But I can tell you that Ukrainians are determined to keep fighting until we defeat the evil, because we know our history. And actually, we see the weakness of Russia too.
Well, Anna, let me just say this. Right now, I have more faith in the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government than I have in my own government and half of my people right now. But I will make this prediction for you and then we'll go. I predict, without 100% guarantee, but I predict that Donald Trump will not be the president of the United States much longer. The American people, at least half of us, really do love democracy. And we are fed up with what he is doing and what the Republicans, well, the fascists are doing. They're no longer Republicans or conservatives. And we're not going to stand for it. We are not Russia. We're not any other country. We're America,
Don't
damn
want
it.
to be Russia.
Well, we don't want to be anybody but Americans, to be honest with you. And we fought a revolution. We fought a bloody civil war. So we know what it is to fight for freedom. Yes, 50% of us have forgotten, but the other 50% of us, especially those that have been in real combat, have not forgotten. And we know what it's like to take back a country. And damn it, we're going to do it. I'm sorry I get emotional, but Trump pisses me off. Um, I hate to say it, but well, Slava Ukraine, you are now my hero country, and I am going to do everything I can to make my own country something I can be proud of again. And I'll end it on this note. Anna from Ukraine, thank you so much for being here, and we will do this again, please. I enjoy having you on, and I know my viewers love to hear your perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And to make you feel optimistic, more optimistic, I can tell you that a lot of former Trump supporters on my channel leave comments that they don't like the way he acts now. So maybe it's not 50-50 anymore. It's even better.
Oh, I agree with you
Thank you.
because what Donald Trump has done is to alienate his own, a lot of his own voters because his policies are now hurting them. They're hurting them in
Yeah.
many, many, many ways. But I'll leave it there. Anna, again, thank you so much. You take care, stay safe. And as I always tell you, try to stay sane.
Thank you.